Good evening, Hatters, and thank you for tuning in to this second open forum centered on issues related to diversity and inclusion in campus climate. I'm Chris Roellke, the 10th president of Stetson University and also a professor in American Studies and Education, and I thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us. I have roughly 15 minutes of remarks focused on my early learnings at Stetson, some of my own thoughts about diversity and inclusion, and to outline some immediate and important commitments I and some of my colleagues are prepared to make as we try to move Hatter Nation forward on issues of inclusion and diversity. I also want to thank Luis Maldonado, Stetson class of 2001, for serving as our moderator tonight. In a few moments, you'll also hear a little bit from Rina Tovar, Ranell Mason, and also available to us tonight is our VP for Student Life, Lua Hancock. Should you have questions at any point tonight, please do put them in the chat box, and Luis will bring them forward during the final half of our time together. You should also know in advance that I also welcome at any time individual interactions, questions, concerns, etc. And you should feel free to reach me directly at president@stetson.edu. I may not get back to you right away, but I will in fact pledge to get back to you soon. I welcome any and all of your questions. In advance, thank you for indulging me in some opening remarks. First, as many of our conversations moving forward will center on issues of identity, on sense of belonging, and on the lived experience at Stetson, I do want to acknowledge my own identity in these conversations. While I have dedicated many decades of work in the field of education to promote equity and access in education, particularly as it pertains to finance, I do want to acknowledge the many advantages I have enjoyed throughout my life because of components of my identity, including but not limited to my gender, my race, my sexuality, my religion, my family's access to education and healthcare, and a host of other socio-political components of my upbringing and my lived experience. It's also my belief that leaders in all settings must be willing to demonstrate humility, vulnerability, and perhaps most importantly, particularly as a leader of an educational institution, demonstrate a commitment to continuous listening, continuous reflection, and continuous learning. It's also my hope and my charge to all of us that we commit ourselves to this, a commitment to continuous learning, continuous reflection, and continuous listening, and also commit ourselves to the important characteristic and disposition of humility. Tonight, it's also important that I acknowledge all the dedicated work that has taken place long before my arrival at Stetson with regard to inclusion and diversity. Tonight does mark the 16th consecutive week we have held webinars in an effort to keep our community informed in real time of developments associated with Stetson's COVID-19 response, our preparations for next week's 2020 election, our experiences within intercollegiate athletics, our partnerships with local public health officials and civic leaders, and Stetson's commitment to diversity and inclusion in light of considerable national, regional, and Stetson-based unrest around racial justice, and how our students, faculty, and staff experiencing life at Stetson in a context of a once-in-a-century set of challenges. In some cases, we have succeeded beyond expectations. In other cases, we have struggled or perhaps even fallen short and have had to rethink our strategies, our deployment of resources, and our collective vision moving forward. I have learned many things during my first 110 days or so here at Stetson, and I'd like to share a few of those learnings with you. Stetson generally, but I believe very importantly, has embraced themes of kindness, empathy, and agency in an exceptionally challenging context, a context that is challenging educationally, residentially, and also economically. I'm pleased to report that due to careful and thorough planning and compliance, we have performed better than anticipated in our response to COVID-19. However, it's also important to acknowledge that considerable anxiety and public health concerns persist at Stetson and nationally, and we must remain vigilant in mitigating the transmission of this virus. Both external and internal events centered on racial justice have amplified, very happily amplified, voices from divergent socio-political perspectives. And as I mentioned earlier, the uncertainty in next week's election has contributed considerably to additional anxiety. I'm also pleased to report in my learning here that Stetson does enjoy a generally positive and collaborative relationship with the local community as evidenced by open communication and cooperation with local and regional health providers and officials, city and county government, and local law enforcement. However, we also need to acknowledge, due in part to the divisive socio-political context that we are experiencing, is less welcoming for some members of our community than for others. And finally, despite considerable efforts over time to promote equity and inclusion, the data and associated narratives do point to differential experiences at Stetson based on a number of demographic characteristics, most notably race and gender, but also employment category. The way in which we have been dialoguing and developing action plans around inclusion and diversity is as follows. The central question has been, how do we use kindness, empathy, and agency to first, meet the needs of particular communities, second, provide as many opportunities as possible for multicultural exchange, and third, how do we create an environment in which all members of our community feel valued and can participate fully in engaging pluralistically to make our community stronger. Finally, I'd like to assert that, like our approach to battling a global pandemic, this work at Stetson, in my view, is about promoting public health and safety, particularly for the most vulnerable among us, and so that a Stetson education can move forward for all. I think if we think about these issues in the frame of public health and safety, we are much more likely to garner the resources necessary to move us forward, and we're much more likely to be experiencing a collaborative spirit. In short, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity you have afforded me to lead Stetson, and I really am genuinely beyond excited about our future work together. I also want to thank all of you, for the considerable time and effort you have expended to promote the health and safety of our community, including around issues of race and inequality. Each of you has played and will continue to play a critical role in ensuring that we can move our students forward in their path to their degrees, even within the context of a global pandemic and in a context of considerable socio-political unrest. I'd like to conclude my remarks with reiterating the commitments I have made as your new president, as we collectively develop a vision and set of concrete strategies for our work together. I commit to practicing kindness, empathy, and agency, in other words, shared ownership, in all interactions with the Office of the President. As I reported last time, I commit to devoting 100% of the President's discretionary budget to student, faculty, staff, and/or community-led diversity and inclusion efforts, up to $50,000 annually for at least the next 3 years. In this first year, I'm pleased to commit half of this amount to the student life area, specifically the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and the other half to our academic enterprise, particularly teaching resources devoted to issues of inclusion and diversity. I have committed to creating a very high-level President's Advisory Council on Diversity and Inclusion to promote engagement of prominent alumni and community members that reflect the diversity of Stetson's student population. The President's Advisory Council will consist of a combination of appointees from the faculty, the student body, the staff, alumni, the Board of Trustees, and very importantly, in my view, members of our local communities in Gulfport and in DeLand. I commit to supporting and implementing 360-degree professional performance evaluations for senior leaders who report to the President. I also commit to such 360-degree evaluations for myself. In my view, it's critical that all senior leaders continuously reflect on their own behaviors and to hold ourselves accountable to all members of the community we serve. I commit to sustaining consistent and visible communication channels among and between all constituents of the university, including students, staff, faculty, administration, alumni, Board of Trustees, and community regional partners. Tonight is an example of one mechanism for keeping those lines of communication open, and there are many others. At our last open forum, I also outlined a sample of key immediate commitments each of my senior colleagues has made to move us forward. Our faculty and our students, through the Faculty Senate and through the Student Government Association, have also been deeply immersed themselves in developing a set of commitments and strategies, including statements on anti-racism and curricular and co-curricular initiatives that are moving forward with all deliberate speed. Finally, I'm pleased to report tonight that I've just signed a national pledge, along with hundreds of other chief executive officers, on supporting more inclusive workplaces. This pledge, among other things, commits Stetson to making our workplace, to having complex and often difficult conversations about diversity and inclusion, to implement and expand anti-bias and anti-racist training, to share broadly both best and also unsuccessful practices, and to make inclusion and diversity a key strategic priority with our Board of Trustees. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. As I have been preaching since my arrival at Stetson on July 1st, kindness not only matters, it enables us to listen, to engage with others unlike ourselves, and to consider paths we can forge together to make our community, in fact, the world, a better place. Again, thank you. It is the greatest honor and privilege of my life to be serving as your president, and I look forward to your questions tonight and always. If I could have others join me on the screen, I have some wonderful introductions to make of some very important Stetson colleagues. I'm pleased to report to you tonight that joining us, an extraordinary Stetson volunteer, Luis Maldonado, who currently serves as chair of the Student Affairs Committee on the Stetson University Board of Trustees. He is from Memphis, Tennessee. He earned his BA in English in 2001. He was magna cum laude and was honored as his class's commencement speaker. He was also a recipient of the Sidney Sullivan Award, the June Brooks Award for Social Activism and Public Service, and was named one of the state's top 20 student leaders by Florida Student Leader magazine. Following Stetson, he graduated from the University of Florida College of Law, cum laude, where he was a two-time Florida Bar Foundation Fellow and a Public Service Fellow. He was also honored for volunteering hundreds of hours for pro bono service through the Pro Bono Project. Luis is passionate about paying it forward, which he has done through student and professional mentoring and by endowing named scholarships in memory of his two mentors, one at Stetson and one at the University of North Florida. Luis has contributed to the Stetson community as a guest and keynote speaker, and through his support of Stetson's Master of Fine Arts of the Americas and the Linda P. Davis Endowed Scholarship, Dr. Wendy B. Libby Endowed Scholarship, the Karen Schmidt Roberts Internship Impact Fund, the Health and Science Initiative, and also to the History and English departments. He's also an avid athletics fan, Hatter Athletics fan, has also supported the women's lacrosse team, the men's and women's cross country teams, and the women's indoor volleyball team. Before his election to the Board of Trustees in 2017, Luis previously served on Stetson College's Arts and Sciences Advisory Board for 5 years, 2012 to 2017, and was part of the inaugural class of Leadership Stetson. Ranell Mason, who many of you have met before because she's been an active participant in many of these weekly webinars that we've conducted over the last 16 weeks, including 7 sessions with alums around the country. So Ranell, thank you. We were joking before this session that I hope she's not counting her volunteer hours at Stetson because they're quite considerable. She graduated from the School of Business with a BBA in 2000 in Management and Marketing. She's a certified paralegal and the Senior Corporate Compliance Paralegal for Masonite International Corporation in Tampa, Florida. After graduating from Stetson, she joined Bankers Life Insurance Group in their annuities department. And during her tenure at Bankers, she worked as a compliance coordinator, filing analyst, and later as a paralegal for the corporate headquarters. In 2009, Ranell moved on to be corporate paralegal at Johnson, Pope, Bacor, Ruppel, and Burns LLP in Clearwater, Florida, and she joined Masonite International Corporation in Tampa in 2011. Ranell is a member of the National Association of Legal Assistants and the Tampa Bay Paralegal Association. She has served as a member of Stetson's Alumni Board since 2006 and now serves as its chair. And a familiar face to many of you will be Rina Tovar Arroyo, Assistant Vice President for Development and Alumni Engagement. And as you know, she's been at Stetson since 2005. She strives to build authentic relationships with alumni so that she understands where their talents, passions, and resources might connect with the university to have the greatest impact on the current student experience. Before joining Stetson, Rina was at Rollins College and other private liberal arts institutions throughout the country. And in 2013, Rina was presented with the NASPA Region 3 Bob E. Leach Award for outstanding service to students. My thanks to my colleagues and friends who are on the screen for joining us tonight. Go Hatters.
Go Hatters. Thank you, Dr. Roellke, for that wonderful introduction. Good evening, everybody. I'll start since I was the last one introduced. I'm so thrilled to be here with you this evening. As Dr. Roellke said, I'm currently serving as the Assistant Vice President for Development, and now I am also serving as the Interim Director of the Office of Parent and Alumni Engagement, while the university conducts a responsible, transparent, and comprehensive search with a diverse candidate pool for the new director of the Office of Alumni and Parent Engagement. In this role, I have had the joy of reconnecting with many alumni whom I have not seen for years, and that has been a blessing in the past 2 weeks since I've been serving in this role. Some of you are on the call tonight, so welcome. I'm glad to have you all here. Since the beginning of our new pandemic virtual world, the Alumni and Parent Engagement team has hosted 2 to 3 virtual events each week for the Hatter Nation, and I'm very proud of the hard work that they've done. And the neat part is that numerous alumni and faculty members have served as panelists and guest speakers for most of those events. And now to wrap up, the team and the Alumni Board are moving full steam ahead for virtual Homecoming 2020, which is next week. We're all really excited about it. And I'm so happy to be here with you again this evening. And I'm going to turn it over to my good friend, Ranell Mason, who is our Alumni Board President, to greet you next.
Thank you, Rina. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. I'm also very glad and honored that you're joining us this evening. To piggyback off of Rina, before I provide an update regarding the Alumni Board, I would like to personally invite you all to register and attend Homecoming 2020. This year, all events are virtual, so no matter where you are, where you find yourself, we hope you'll be able to join us. We're going to place the link for registration and information in the chat box. It should be on the right side of your screen, so if you look there, the link will be provided. Now, I'd like to provide a quick update regarding the great work the Alumni Board has been doing since April with regards to better engagement of our diverse alumni network. In April, decision was made that the bylaws of the Alumni Board needed to be revisited. From there, it was determined that with the changes taking place both around the world and at the university, a multicultural committee under the board was greatly needed. Following this decision, significant visioning and planning work went into the structure and plans for the committee over the summer. On September 18, 2020, new bylaws of the Alumni Board were passed, which include a multicultural committee. All very excited about this. If you will allow me to share the purpose, mission, and structure of the committee. The purpose of the committee is to strengthen the bond between diverse alumni, students, and their university through strategies, programs, and initiatives to further the mission of Stetson University Alumni Association and its board. The mission of the committee is to uphold the welfare of multicultural alumni, their university fostering a more inclusive alumni community. And lastly, but certainly not any less, multicultural committee will be comprised of up to 8 members. This will include a committee chair, current alumni board members, and alumni association members in and around the Stetson community. The development of the committee is in its infancy. We're making great strides to have this committee fully formed, starting to reach out to our diverse alumni base by December. Once all committees have been formed, we'll post information for each committee and its representative chair on the Alumni Board website. We'll also provide this link in the chat box so that if you'd like to save it, you can go back and revisit it. Sometime in early December, we should have everything on there. And lastly, if you'd like to submit a nomination for the Alumni Board, the Multicultural Committee, please do so. We have a form that is available online. This form is web-based, so you are welcome to as many nominations as you would like. And we've also provided this link in the chat box for you this evening. Thank you again for your time. I look forward to seeing you all very soon, and certainly at Homecoming 2021 on the Stetson campus. Thanks so much, and back to you, Luis.
Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We're definitely excited to have you. To sort of piggyback on some of the items that Dr. Roellke touched on in terms of my background, I am presently a member of the Board of Trustees, but specifically I am the chair of the Student Affairs Committee, which is a committee that's near and dear to my heart because I was very actively involved in all of the diversity-related affinity groups on campus. So I was part of the second iteration of what is now Kaleidoscope, but it was the GLBT organization named Common Ground, where I served as president. I helped with my roommates at the time establish a Hispanic organization called Hola, where I served as president of that as well for a time. I did everything from help bring the AIDS quilt to the campus to bring Stetson's first drag show to the campus. I participated in the Indian Student Association and their dances of their various festivals. And so I am all about diversity and inclusion, and am thrilled that, that we're doing this. I'm a first-generation college student, so I'm working on items related to serve those students as well. And most recently, I decided to make a gift to the university to help it study sort of its multicultural history, to examine what it's done in its past, as well as to help us chart a course for the future. So I will kind of open it up first with a video that we received from one of our hatters, one of our alums, Ella Shepard. Would you please cue that video?
Hi, President Roellke. My name is Ella Shepard. I am the class of 2010. I have two sort of points to make today. I was really outraged, and so I was looking for policies that the university holds that would make it inappropriate, make it so that the university could hold her accountable for this, and so that we, the community that cares about Stetson, could also point to this and say, no, see, this is not okay. But I didn't find anything like that, and I'm just curious, why doesn't Stetson have a policy in their student code of conduct that condemns racist behavior? Also, that same code of conduct should be in the employee handbook. The employee handbook is not available to the public. I did search for that. I wasn't able to find it. I think the employee employee manual, employee conduct should be public, and I'm curious as to why it's not. I'm also curious as to why there is not a policy in student code of conduct that condemns racist behavior.
Oh, thank you very much for submitting the question in advance, and they're great questions, and I'll try to respond as best I can. First, you're absolutely correct that there should be stated policies and procedures when we do have incidents of bias, when we do have incidents of hurtful behavior. And in reviewing the student code of conduct, code of community standards, we call it, we do have a section on harmful behaviors, which I think does include language around behaviors that should not be tolerated in our community. I think in particular, to respond to your question more fully, it would be very helpful for us to have additional policies, particularly as they pertain to social media, which has often takes on a life of its own with regard to language and behaviors that can be painful for members of our community. So I'm eager for us to move forward on being a bit more specific when it comes to issues of anti-racism and what our expectations are, both in person and in virtual formats. We've had some unfortunate incidents on campus through Zoom bombings, et cetera. So I think it's important for us to keep those policies and procedures modernized. With regard to the employee piece of it, I did consult in advance with our provost, Noel Painter, and I think we would like to acknowledge that we have some good language in there around making sure that all employees abide by our stated mission and values, but we probably have more work to do when it comes to actually having anti-racist kinds of language within our employee handbook. And I personally don't have any objection to the employee handbook being made public on our website. I think that actually could be helpful for future employees of Stetson to be able to see what our policies and procedures are. So I personally have no objection to that. So it's a very, very good suggestion. Ella was also kind enough to indicate a second question, which was about pointing to some of our peer institutions that are doing some excellent work with regard to inclusion and diversity, and specifically spoke to some of the strong efforts that are being made at one of our partner institutions, Valencia College. And so in anticipating this question, I would like Lua Hancock, if she could, to join the stream because she has some further insights on our ongoing collaborations with Valencia.
Thank you, and I wish I could see all the beautiful faces of our alumni. I miss you. It's not, homecoming just isn't going to be the same. But I will share that I appreciate Ella's question, and I emailed her back, but to share with everyone, Valencia has a program called the Peace and Justice Institute, and if you're in Central Florida, I would highly recommend that you check it out. Their programming, their workshops, almost all of which is free to the community, some online, some in person, are fantastic. Last summer, 2019, we sent a cohort of faculty and staff to their Educators Institute, which is an intensive one-week seminar about justice in education in the classroom and in the social spaces. We had someone from Residence Life go to that as well. And I've gone to their Diversity Week, which is sort of like our Values Day, a bit extended on some of their campuses. And then we hosted the Peace and Justice Institute faculty and leaders on Stetson's campus in 2019 as well. And we've been discussing ways that potentially the students who graduate, that program is just a certificate program at this point, but students who graduate with a certificate program in peace and justice could have an academic pipeline to come to Stetson, potentially in our Peace Corps prep program or maybe in our honors program. So they met with some of our faculty and staff. And obviously, COVID has us a little distracted on some of the curricular initiatives, but I look forward to getting back to them to work on what the next steps could be in partnership with the Peace and Justice Institute. So thanks for the suggestion, Ella.
Lua, thank you. And if I may chime in just with a little bit more context on that too, one of the things that I'm deeply passionate about, and Luis and Lua both know this, is I think there's also great potential to do things like greater collaborations with local area partners, such as Valencia, such as Daytona State, such as the city of DeLand and Volusia County more broadly in our community in Gulfport. So it's a personal passion of mine to bridge any perceived or real gaps between theory and practice, to give our students the opportunity to engage with the local area community. So I hope you'll take that in the spirit in which it's intended, which is that I think your comments and your questions are spot on. We don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel on a lot of this because there's some great things happening around. Some of them right here from Stetson, which is one of the reasons I signed that CEO pledge, right? So if we're gonna be honest about our failures, we're gonna be honest about our successes. And I think it would be great for Stetson to champion the things that we do well, such as community-based learning. I think that's a huge part of our component here at Stetson to try to put ourselves on the map, an important inclusion and diversity work. I've gone on too long, Luis. We should move on to our next questions. But again, Ella, thank you for taking the time to do that, to submit a video. I encourage others to do so as well.
Yes, thank you, Ella. The next question we have up is from our law school campus, and the student asks, how do we as students work to indicate to our peers that we actually do not all just get along and that we're concerned with more than just passing the bar when some of us are in such a minority position on campus? If it's not important for them to know now, it won't be important in the future either when they are representing minority clients in the future.
Yep. Excellent question. I also appreciate that it was coming from the College of Law. College of Law, in some ways, in my early time here, has really done some very, very interesting work on inclusion and diversity, including some fascinating work around green benches that have a very controversial history in that region of Florida. And I just think that some of the creativity and innovation that's coming out of law school with regard to inclusion and diversity is terrific. That's a side note. Let me address this question specifically. I'd like to refer back to my earlier remarks, which I think it's really critical for all of us to the dispositions are just as important, I think, as whatever particular policy tweak or strategic initiative we might undertake. Humility, kindness, empathy, and the ability to listen. And the ability to try to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Those are dispositions, right? Those are, and we're in an educational institution, so we should be able to share, hopefully in a civil manner, divergent perspectives on critical issues that are in our community, whether it be about race, whether it be about sexuality, whether it be about religious affiliation. So I encourage all of us, which has been difficult to do during this very anxious time of a pandemic, to really take a step back and take the opportunity to listen. I really think that that will go a tremendously long way toward allowing for divergent voices to be heard, for those that have been historically disenfranchised to be heard. And so I really am hoping all of us in an educational institution would be open to hearing and learning about those divergent perspectives. I know that's not a specific answer to the question. It's a more generalized one, but I really would like to make the case that the dispositions we bring to difficult conversations are just as important as the conversations themselves, if I'm making any sense at all on the screen, which is the idea that we bring our full selves to the conversation. We bring our humble selves to the conversation. We bring our openness to the conversation. We take the time to listen and make sure that all these voices are heard, including among staff members, including among folks that are junior faculty, folks that are perhaps even adjunct faculty who don't have the same kind of protections for their voice that others in our community might have. So again, I hope you'll tolerate a more generalized answer to that question, but I think those dispositions are vitally important to move Stetson forward on both of our campuses, both at the College of Law and on the DeLand campus.
Thank you, Dr. Roellke, and thank you to the student who submitted that question.
Yes.
Another question related to actually from the law school, and it's asking about when there are inappropriate actions that students take, whether it's about open hatred or bigotry, what does Stetson do, and how does it show that it's taking prejudice, racism, bigotry on campus seriously?
That's great. And I think that's very much connected to the prior question as well, I think, in my view. We do have more robust processes that we've had in the past, I think. And I want to commend, I said in my opening remarks, there's been a lot of work that's preceded me at Stetson, and I want to acknowledge that work, creating a bias education support team on both campuses. I had such great conversations with the diversity leadership team at the College of Law. I would say that one of the things you saw from the campus climate survey, which is an upside, and I don't want to tell just all the good news. One of the better outcomes of 2016 to 2020 is a higher degree of comfort among members of our community to report incidents of bias, right, and discriminatory behavior, right? That's a good sign. It's not perfect. It doesn't mean that we're all fine, but it does suggest something about a comfort level to come forward when somebody feels as though they have been wronged, or if someone has behaved in a way that is outside our community expectations. In my view, that's a step in the right direction. Having done an awful lot of work, for example, at Vassar College, which, by the way, I almost had a faux pas earlier where I almost said Vassar College in my opening remarks because I spent the last 21 years of my life there. So I apologize for that. I'm all Stetson now, believe me. But having spent a considerable time and effort developing our Title IX policies and procedures at Vassar, one of the things that was a really important outcome is we saw a huge skyrocketing in reporting. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that when we engage in a process that those that are victims of that feel as though they've been completely received justice. But I think the fact that we have an increased reporting of bias is a positive thing, and we should not be afraid of that. Again, we're educational institutions, right? So when something happens that is outside of our community expectations and is hurtful or painful, we need to have an avenue in which that can be addressed, right? Because we're an educational institution. I can't hear you, Luis. Perhaps you're muted.
So the next question asks, since the last campus climate survey, there doesn't seem to be much movement. What will be done differently this time? Great.
I think that's a common frustration I've heard in my accelerated listening and learning tour on the community in my first 100 days here, is that we think it's great that Stetson has committed itself to doing campus climate surveys every 4 years. And I think we have not been very successful, and I think my colleagues would agree with this, despite considerable effort and tenacity and interest and engagement on these issues, we haven't been particularly good or strong about identifying, again, those successes and those failures and communicating those successes and failures broadly and transparently to the community. Luis, I know, for example, you yourself just committed some of your own resources to try to document more fully and thoroughly those success points and those challenges over time, like creating a timeline of our work on diversity and inclusion. I think that's vitally important. I think we should not unnecessarily beat ourselves up about our failures, but we should use them as a learning opportunity to move us forward. And being transparent about those failures is a positive step. So I don't know if Luis, if you want to speak further to what the project that you've just funded, but I see that as a very positive investment.
Sure. So the project is still sort of very much in its infancy, but its goal is to provide a student an opportunity to work with faculty and perhaps more students, more than just one, to do sort of a research of what Stetson has done, both from admitting its first Black student, everything fast forward to having gender neutral bathrooms, and exploring everything in between, when certain organizations came on board, when Stetson started offering same-sex partner benefits, just a range of issues that the university has tackled, and sort of highlight either why some of those things have gone well, identify areas of improvement, and areas for additional growth. I think I share what you said at the initial of these talks that happened a couple weeks ago, that we can't really understand where we're going unless we understand our history, and hopefully this initiative will put it somewhere where we can see it visually, kind of see where we've gone, and then identify our high points, and then where necessary, help us examine some of our lower points, just to have that progress that we all are searching for today.
Luis, I thank you for that contribution, not only your financial contribution, but also the contribution tonight to why that's important. I do think interrogating our history a bit is vitally important. Again, some of my past experiences at Vassar College, which underwent a very dramatic demographic shift over the last decade, quite intentional demographic shift, trying to recruit more first-generation college students, a more diverse student body, and also a more diverse faculty. We engaged in this historical interrogation, and actually one of the outcomes of that was quite fascinating, was historical markers on the campus. For instance, there was at one point in Vassar's history, there was a residence hall that was designated for Black students, and nobody really ever knew that took place at Vassar. And having an historical marker that when people visit that space, to know that this is part of the trajectory of Vassar's history with regard to inclusion and diversity. We also didn't shy away from having a marker when our main building was taken over in the early 70s by students of color, having a set of demands that they wanted the curriculum to be more responsive to their needs. They wanted the community to be more inclusive and so on. So rather than viewing those as things that we need to brush under the rug, I think that there's potential there to actually celebrate some of those markers, right? And celebrate some of those progress points. Again, not to suggest that we don't have more work ahead of us, but that there are people that came before us that have worked their tails off to try to make this community a more inclusive and more welcoming, and those things should be acknowledged.
Absolutely. And just, a reminder to folks, please go ahead, type your questions in the chat box so that we can make sure to get some of that live participation. But at this time, I'll go ahead and move on to the next question that was submitted in advance. Bear with me one second. I guess this one's asking for a little bit more of a drill down. So it's asking about what specific next steps do you have for improving Black lives and for racial justice at Stetson? You've asked, I know you've covered some of that through, designated your discretionary fund. But at the same time, folks, in response to this question, if you have recommendations, put those in the chat box too, and then maybe we can, explore some of those together.
Excellent. And it gives me a great opportunity to also highlight, as we're going to go through homecoming coming up in a week, you should also know that there's also a wonderful opportunity for the Office of Diversity and Inclusion has put together a celebration and interrogation of our history as part of a union. 50 years, I believe it's Resistance to Transformation is the title. And I don't think it'll be a surprise to many alums out there. You may have seen it on social media, et cetera. There's a continuing set of recommendations that have been made by the Office of Diversity and Inclusion that draw from 12 recommendations that were made back in 1970. So here we are in 2020, and some of that work is still incomplete. So as I am your new president, one of the things that's been so interesting to me has been to really, again, listen and learn. And here's my take. lots of great pockets of efforts have taken place around these issues. We take a step back when hurtful things happen and painful things happen, such as bias incidents, when things happen even outside Stetson's gates that happen nationally that are quite painful and frankly horrific at times, right? So we've got to make sure that we are keeping our feet to the fire on making progress for our community, and that we are always working toward being mission consistent, values consistent at Stetson. Why do I raise that? Because one of the challenges I think that lies, and I'll take responsibility for this because I think it's on my plate to do, all these wonderful pockets, the faculty working on anti-racist statements, right? We've got, I just did an accessibility tour with a student of ours that is wheelchair bound, to understand better how does an 1883 campus try to move forward in terms of universal design so that this student's experience and students like her have the opportunity to navigate this campus more safely and in a less frustrating manner, right? So there's all these wonderfully well-intended things, but I think what we're lacking, and this is not unusual among peer institutions, we're lacking coordination of that effort. We're lacking transparency around those efforts. We're lacking a universal commitment around some of these initiatives. But I have been actually blown away by the way this community, and again, most of my experience thus far has been centered around DeLand, although I have connected with the community in Gulfport. Because of COVID, I haven't been able to physically be there and interact with them as much as I have on the DeLand campus. But I see a tremendous amount of positive energy around this. And as your new president, one of the great things I want to do is try to capitalize on that extraordinary energy and the wonderful ideas that have already been put forward, right? So we don't have to necessarily reinvent the world. The community has spoken, right? The community has spoken via the campus climate survey, through a number of robust conversations that happen in individual offices. The Staff Advisory Council has spoken. The Equity and Inclusion Group has spoken. The Black Student Association has spoken. Now I think what our community is looking for is a concrete, clear set of actions that we can take to move ourselves forward. And by the way, that doesn't mean we're done with the conversations. Those conversations still need to occur. But I see one of my jobs here in my early time at Stetson is to try to make sense of the lay of the land, which I'm working so diligently to do. And then what can we do right away, and what can we do strategically for the longer haul? And I think you should hold me accountable for doing that work to make sure that we can provide some clarity, some transparency, and frankly, some energy around moving us forward. And I know that there's impatience out there, justifiably so, but we are in an environment where every single dollar, we are watching every single dollar. We cut our budget by $17 million. And some of this, frankly, is going to be resource intensive. Some of this work is not free. Some of this work does require additional investment. I have not been shy about the need for more investment in this area with our Board of Trustees. We just had our Board of Trustees meetings last week. Luis, you were a part of them. And our next meetings are going to be focused quite intentionally around issues of diversity and inclusion, including some part of our discussion, particularly in the context of student affairs with your leadership, where you tackled it head on in your committee meeting. That's a long-winded answer, but again, as I'm trying to learn so quickly and so fully about the Stetson University community, I think one of my central tasks, literally by the first of the year, is to really leverage the work that's already been accomplished at Stetson and bring some clarity and transparency to that.
And just at the trustee level, what I can share in terms of commitment to this issue is because it's part of our charge for the Student Affairs Committee is diversity and inclusion issues. So, as the president just mentioned, I did make it the sort of the center of our committee meeting. But beyond that, I've engaged in discussions with the Multicultural Student Council chair on the Stetson campus, the DeLand campus. I've spoken to the SJ president and vice president to talk about their platform, which also includes diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I've reached out to the Student Bar Association over at the law school, and we'll be trying to make other points of contact over there to sort of explore these issues. As well as, I went on the website. I tried to see where can I find what information about diversity and inclusion, and in doing that, I learned, there's not one central place for example, like on the Office of Diversity and Inclusion website, where it would show what scholarships Stetson has that is for those populations. So part of it's a marketing issue, and as I'm looking at things critically and making contact with different points of the university, it sort of helps us all move the needle, something that we care about as alums, as my position on the Board of Trustees, but also just as good people. So I'll move on to the next question. It says, Stetson has a BEST, which stands for Bias Education and Support Team, process that handles reports of inappropriate behavior. Is it possible for Stetson to share data on that team's work?
It's a great question, and I don't want to avoid it. We're going to ask Savannah Griffin, who manages the BEST process, to join the screen. But Savannah, before I turn it over to you, is it okay if I add one more learning of mine at Stetson, which is, and it may be controversial when I say this, but it's what I really believe, so I might as well say it. I think Stetson has invested a considerable amount of resources in having outside consultants come, including managing the Campus Life and Diversity Campus Climate Survey. All of that, I think outside expertise is vital. We should not shy away from having outside expertise moving forward. But my overall take after now my 110th day is now it's time for Stetson to look inwardly much more, right? And not necessarily rely so much on hiring outside folks to come in. There is tremendous energy and expertise right here in DeLand and right at Gulfport. That's my early assessment. Now it's a question of how do we mobilize those resources into action plans. So I wasn't cranky about outside consultants. I just wanted to say I'd like to see us invest in ourselves more with strategies as opposed to continuing to hire people from the outside, because I think we've done that work, and I think it's now time for resourcing these things internally. Sorry, I sidetracked this, but I wanted to get that in. Savannah, can you talk to us about BEST?
Yes. Hi, I'm Savannah Jane Griffin. I'm the Executive Director of Community Engagement and Inclusive Excellence, and I serve on our Bias Education Support Team, which has been around for 2.5 years now. But as you can imagine, we have been building our systems and protocol and building our team. And so we now have a team of 5 faculty and staff that serve on our BEST team. And we actually are planning to release our report from the 2019-2020 academic year, which goes from August of 2019 to August 1st of 2020. And we're hoping to have that posted on our website no later than December. I'm hoping it's sooner than that. We're just finalizing some of the data and making sure that the report is complete. We did receive a large number of reports last year, and so that's why it's taking us some time, and it's a new system, and we're looking at other institutions and building our processes off of best practice. So we're hoping to have that in December, and an email communication will go out when it is posted for people to review.
Thank you, Savannah. We did receive a comment. It reads that inclusion is the goal and diversity is a fact of life. There aren't issues of diversity and inclusion. Racism and bigotry are the issues. Call it out. Thank you for engaging in this conversation and committing to action. Thank you for your comment. And I don't know if anyone else wants to tackle sort of the pockets there of diversity and inclusion to discuss what those mean, or at least what those mean to us at Stetson.
I'll just chime in first by I very much appreciate the comment. I think sometimes we fumble around the language, and the language is indeed important. And I thank whoever submitted the comment. I think you're spot on.
Bear with me a second. I'm having some issues with one screen while trying to look at the other. We received one question about the composition of different working groups and committees. It asks, we typically see the same students, faculty, and staff serving on committees, working groups, etc. How will you ensure better representation in the post-survey subgroups?
That's great. I'd like to call on my colleague Lua Hancock to chime in here. I was smiling a little bit because we've had a lot of internal conversations about that, and that problem of the same people coming. It actually is something that we've been thinking about with regard to these webinars, right? So we can be proud of having 16 or so consecutive weeks of webinars, but are we reaching as broad an audience as we need to reach? Very legitimate question. Lua, perhaps you can speak to that.
I can, and I'm just going to take a little latitude to go back to the question before this too, because I think it is so vital. So really, the work, and I'm still learning too, but just to describe it from my current space of learning, when you look at diversity, which is representation, like just percentage-wise representation, et cetera, on our campus, although there is still work to do with the student population, especially in DeLand, which is where I spend most of my time, I would say that there is a lot of diversity in different areas, such as socioeconomic status. I've actually never worked at a place with such diverse socioeconomic status, which brings such a genuineness and beauty to the community. Like Luis mentioned, as a first-generation graduate himself, that ability, and I know students who have graduated from Stetson who have done this personally, to break multi-generational poverty, et cetera, is just unbelievable to be a part of in any way. And that learning that it brings to our community is so beautiful. Also, other demographic groups, racial and ethnic demographics being the one I think that right now is so vital in America. And then what do you do with that diversity, right? Just because people come to campus, they don't feel necessarily that events there speak to them. All the actions that we take, all the events that we hold, all the ways that we speak, who we invite to the table, sends constant messages about who's supposed to be there and who we think isn't supposed to be there. So I think as we work towards more of inclusion in our curriculum, in our spaces, in our social events, in our language, in our websites, we have a lot of work to do, to be honest. And that doesn't even get to equity, the fact that we know that studies show that faculty of color, especially women of color, are more likely to get evaluations from their students that are harsher. If we know that to be true, what are we doing about that? And then there's multiculturalism, which is a whole different thing. So we sometimes unintentionally use those terms interchangeably, which we shouldn't, as Dr. Roellke mentioned. And if you're doing work towards one of those columns, it's not going to meet the other goal. So we have to be really purposeful. So I'll get off my soapbox on that one and tell you the exciting news about the committees is that I was a little worried, especially during COVID time when we announced the working groups from the campus climate survey, that people just wouldn't volunteer, honestly. I mean, we're all sort of overwhelmed. We took out a lot of the breaks, so faculty and students and staff are just going. And I was amazed by the response of students, faculty, staff, alumni, some of which are some of the regular players and a bunch of which are not, which is really great. I think that people realize at this moment that being passive is part of the problem. I hope, at least that's what I'm seeing in the people who are on the committees. And then we also have to do a good job of noticing, looking at and analyzing who might not be present or represented there. And do we want to do some asking of other people who could be there? So that's a really vital question. Thank you so much. And I'm hopeful at least that the current committees look to have much more diverse representation.
Thank you, Lua. Another question/comment we received. I guess I have a number of concerns, it reads, regarding discretionary spending. I suppose it strikes me that guest speakers are actually less effective dollar for dollar than recruiting and retaining faculty with anti-racist competencies. Is there a plan?
First, I have a generalized agreement, as you could tell from my earlier remarks, that I think we need to invest in ourselves as best as we can. And I don't mind sharing with you too, I shared in my opening remarks, it's not as though I personally have a tremendous amount of discretionary money. I have a Board of Trustees member here. Perhaps he'd like to boost my discretionary budget. But it's, again, my intent of giving half of that $50,000 to the student side and to the academic side was trying to, again, prioritize this as investing in ourselves and people. I learned even as a candidate, as your president, that Stetson really runs on people power. It really does. It runs on people power, as many higher education institutions do. But I think it's particularly true about Stetson, where you have dedicated folks working their tail off to try to make this place operate. We saw that an extraordinary effort in real time during this global pandemic. We're seeing it right now with regard to our work on anti-racism, including wonderful, incredible stepping up by our student leaders, incredible stepping up by our faculty of color to do race in the 21st century. I wanted to add one other thing as I was reflecting on our conversation, and I hope it's helpful. I think the other thing I've learned in my experiences as a higher education leader is that our students, particularly the ones that are most marginalized, don't want to just see the leadership when the crisis happens, right? You want to see the leadership in more organic settings when it's not crisis time, right? And I think that's really something I learned over my career that is really important, that you want to be able to build trust organically outside the time of a crisis, so that when a crisis does hit, and they will come, that there's a better opportunity to move and cut to the chase in terms of solutions. So I felt, Luis, compelled to want to share that it is something that I'm continuing to learn about, but it's something I have learned previously as well, that I personally am committed to trying to meet students and faculty and others that come to us from marginalized communities to develop that trust and that relationship outside of the crisis. Now, regretfully, and it's not a complaint, but since I've arrived, we have not been out of crisis mode, right? So I look forward to those ongoing conversations. I look forward to the times when we're not smack in the middle of a set of crises to build that relationship, because I think that really can move a community forward. If you get to meet people outside of crisis moments, you get to understand and listen and hear about their lived experiences outside of a crisis. That can be really powerful.
Thank you, Dr. Roellke. We received a comment which said that they agree with the comment about outside consultants and believe that it is essential to commit to regular climate surveys and increasing participation significantly.
Yep. Again, I appreciate all those that are chiming in with the remarks. I agree with that. I agree with that, and I think my colleagues and faculty more broadly would also agree with that. We do want to constantly assess ourselves. We constantly want to, again, keep our feet to the fire on these issues. I also believe strongly, you know, I've been doing the kindness mantra so much this year so far. I absolutely believe that that gets contagious. I absolutely believe that kindness can be contagious. And so if we can all commit ourselves again to those dispositions of humility, kindness, empathy, and agency, I'm absolutely convinced we're going to get to a better place at Stetson University.
Thank you. And I mean, I guess, you know, one thing that in terms of action items, you know, some of the questions asked about specific action items, but I'll just, you know, throw it out again. If for me as a student, it was important not just to see that there wasn't a Latino organization and that there wasn't an LGBT organization. Like, I took it upon myself to rally others to try to create one. And I think as a community, that's something that we're doing either, you know, through these discussions, but also, you know, the president said at the beginning, you know, email him at president@stetson.edu with your suggestions about, you know, what you think that we can all do to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Luis, thank you. And it gives me an opportunity to indicate that, and maybe I'm being redundant, but, you know, we have these extraordinary sets of ideas that are in a different, coming from different parts of our constituencies, right? And I also want to acknowledge that we're in a recession and we're in a very challenging time where our students are very worried about being able to afford their education next semester and the semester afterwards. Because of our economic context, I think it's vital that we be able to really come together around a set of a smaller number of priorities, right? Because we're not, let's be honest with one another. Honesty is important. We're not going to be able to do it all tomorrow. And so one of our challenges that lies ahead for the senior team, for the faculty, for the students, student leadership, is what are the 2-3 things where we really want to invest in because we don't have the ability, and I don't think it's frankly useful to throw money at the problem. What we need to do is come around a set of guiding principles, dispositions, agreements that we can afford and we can move forward on together. So I am thinking all the time about resources. As I said earlier, a lot of this is going to come down to resources. Well, regretfully, we're not in a position right now where we have ample resources at our disposal. So it's going to require, again, I think some dispositional work, some behavioral work that frankly doesn't cost a dime.
And I see that we have reached the top of the hour here, and we do have some closing slides that we would like to review.
Luis, huge thank you to you and to my other presenters. Fantastic. You folks energize me tremendously. Thank you for your commitments. Thank you. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but we have the next segment of Race in the 21st Century, Black Girl Magic, Friday, October 30th, 3 to 4 p.m. That's our next piece of wonderful work. Again, all done on volunteer time, and I want to thank those folks that have led that effort. I would be remiss if I didn't share with you. I hope that you stay safe and you stay well. This is an extraordinary time in our country. We are having a little bit of a spike here in COVID transmission. We need to remain vigilant in that. We've got a very high stress election coming up next week. Let's all not only care for each other, but let's also take care of ourselves, right? I think that's vitally important also. Do the kind of self-care you need in order to thrive here at Stetson. It's a big part of the puzzle. Thank you for tolerating my long narratives. I appreciate your participation, and please do email me at president@stetson.edu with anything that's on your mind. Thank you. Stay safe and well.
Thank you for joining us this evening.